guessing that it's going to be a little bit too bright, so I'm going to just... Now, just by all means, get yourself really comfortable.
Yeah, I'm going to put this cushion behind my back. Oh, and now I lost your mic.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
I'll fix that. Okay, let me just a sec. Okay.
See, Moyra, it's happening. She was funny. One of the last good conversations I had with her, she was sort of in and out, was she said to me, "I have another book in me." Oh. And she said, "We have to get this done." And she even had a title for it.
What was the title?
Now I'm trying to think of what the title was. I can tell you because I wrote it down. And I wrote a whole series of notes after she came home, after I come home from that talk with her and that visit, of what she wanted to tell them, of what it was like now that she was there, and the changes that still needed to happen. And
okay, I'm going to just...
Okay. Moyra. So you can watch if you're very, very quiet, or you and Mommy can go in the other room. Okay?
What would you rather do?
Another one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what's going to be that.
Grandma,
Yes, dear?
we have something to give you.
Oh, you have something to give me? What have you got to give me?
If you don't mind just taking it to her, because I've got...
Yeah, I'm going to have to bring it to me.
Down.
She's got me.
So I have to say that this camera is acting up just a little bit.
Okay.
So I will be glancing over here to make sure it's still recording.
Okay.
If it cuts out, we will just go, that's fine. And then we'll start it again. So I have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
And I will guide you through those, but this is your interview, and I know you have things you want to say. So those things, just don't hesitate to say, Megan, actually, I want to talk about this, or
okay.
We want to make sure that you get a chance to say what you want to say.
Okay.
And also that you do not feel obliged to answer any of my questions or to talk about anything that makes you uncomfortable. I know I've said that, but I just want to reiterate that.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
But anything to do with the work that I had the opportunity to do with Moyra, I will gladly share.
Yes. Okay. So I would like to start off with you just saying, I think it's the 14th of May. 15th, sorry, of May. And here we are in Surrey, at your home in Surrey, Joyce.
Yes.
And you are Joyce Wright. So if you can just say who you are for the camera.
Okay. I'm Joyce Wright, and I live in Surrey, BC. And I was a friend of Moyra's since 1981. And we were colleagues and then became very close friends.
Okay. So, Joyce, can you tell me perhaps just a little bit about your life before you met Moyra and how you came to work with Moyra at Valleyview?
I was a stay-at-home mom. My background is education. And we had 4 children very close together. So at that point, I was raising teenagers, but I was also very involved in community life. I loved working with volunteers and being part of our church community, being part of our regular community. I was very interested in seniors projects. And I went to a ministerial meeting because I was very interested in the spiritual life, particularly of a lot of the seniors, that it didn't seem to be happening all that much. And our minister was supposed to go, but I went that day. And Glenn Watts, who was a chaplain at Valleyview Hospital, at the end said that their volunteer coordinator had resigned and that they were looking for a new one. And would I consider becoming, at least looking into it and coming down and meeting Moyra Jones? And I said, well, I will consider it, but I have a very full plate and I'm really not interested in going back to work full time. But I am very interested in mental health, and if I can promote spirituality within the seniors and looking at them as a whole, then I would think about it. Well, Glenn and I had been working along with some other people in the community on getting a songbook for seniors together. And so he said, well, why don't you take that up and you drop them off at Moyra's office? Well, I went to the hospital and she wasn't there. So 2 or 3 nights later, I got a phone call from Moyra and she said, from all the reports I hear of you, she said, I think that I really would like to have you as part of my team. She said, you're the only one that I've had to phone twice to come for an interview. So I went for an interview. And her visions and her goals were so much like my own. And I had no medical background because, as I say, my background was in education, and anytime I would learn something new, whether it was with the school or with the community or the church, as soon as I would come home from that course, immediately it would be, how can we put it together to make it sense for the children or for the adults or whatever. And it wasn't long before they had to have a volunteer coordinator immediately, so I was taken on as intern and then became hired.
That's great. You know what? This damn thing has just fallen off again.
Oh dear.
I don't know. I think this just could be the kind of story of this. The subtext of the interview will be the dealing with the mic. Anyways. Too little. Okay, that was great. So, where did you work? Where did you live at that time?
We were living in Coquitlam at that time, and so Valleyview, Riverview was very close to us,
Yeah.
so it wasn't a great distance.
Yeah, I was just curious. And your education, was it a bachelor's of education?
No, I came out of Saskatchewan with a permanent standard teaching certificate, and then you just added courses to that. And I added a lot of life courses. I was always interested in leadership and leadership training and leadership development and encouraging people to look for their potential. So in any kind of volunteering situation that I became a coordinator for in the community or in the school or in the church, I was trying to encourage people to really get some knowledge of what it was they were doing and why they were doing it. Because volunteering really helps you yourself. You're giving. You really are giving, but you're learning. And you're trying to make a better place for where the people are. And that's what happened at Valleyview. I looked at where volunteers were at that time and what they were doing and the potential, but also from the community development aspect. Moyra and I were both concerned of people were afraid and are still afraid of mental health issues. And particularly among seniors, because we don't want to look at that ourselves. And one of the reasons Moyra had a big picture back then was that she wanted to have a better place. She wanted to have a different kind, change the paradigm of how we cared for these people. And she had read an article about in England. She was always researching articles, and one of the articles had said that they were warehousing their seniors, and they wanted something better, but they hadn't been able to come up with it, and particularly with people that had organic brain syndrome that we jumbled everybody into, or senility, because we really didn't, at that point, at least where we were, use the word dementia all that much. And so it was, how can we improve that bigger picture? And so part of my job was, how could I get that word out to the community to encourage people to come and give of their time and their talents, and for them to learn themselves that, yes, it's very scary to have a mental disease, but I remember one of the first lectures I heard Moyra giving, to people that were coming in. She said, you know, when you have a brain attack, everyone wants to back up. They're not sure what to do. But if someone came in the hospital door or a doctor's office door and said, I'm having a heart attack, immediately everything would stop. A brain attack is really no different. We just haven't been able to find the right way to work with it yet. And so she wanted to make a better place until there's a cure, until we know how to change that. And we still don't. But back in 1981, we didn't know how to change it, that she was going to change how we cared for the people and what was important in their lives.
You're a very eloquent person. I don't notice any missing words. So this is really powerful stuff that you're saying, and I want to backtrack a little bit and have you speak a little bit more to that, to how you and Moyra work together, I think, perhaps with Glenn too, but particularly you and Moyra, to break down that community institution divide, which you're setting up as being about destigmatizing mental health difficulties. I know you've said a little bit, but if you want to speak to it a little bit more about how being a volunteer at the hospital helps bridge the gap between community and institution and the gap between those people having mental health issues, they're over there, us and them, the us and them divide.
Well, it was truly, when I look back, it was truly so much more an us and them than even when Moyra took ill herself. And she always used to quip that there had to be a better place coming if anything happened to her. And with her father having dementia, having Alzheimer's disease in particular, she just knew there had to be a better way of working with them. And at the time I met Moyra, she had already worked at George Derby Hospital, and she had seen the involvement of the Legions. And so she had some Legions already involved in the volunteer services at Valleyview. So part of my job then was I would go out and talk to them. And then they would come in and still have their beer and social nights once a month on different wards and whatnot. But I went out and actually spoke to them and had them ask me questions about what some of the questions they had too that weren't being answered when they just came to have a social night with them, or brought them out into the community, those that could go out into the community to have dinner. And so we started from that spot as to where volunteerism really was. But Moyra looked at the whole rehab. So it's kind of hard for me to just pull in. I can tell you my part, but her idea was there was the rehabilitation of the whole person, whether they remained at Valleyview or whether they had an opportunity to go back into the community. And how did you involve not only the community, but their family, because there were so few family people coming at that time. And she and I would have long talks as to how this was going to work. And she would see in some of the occupational therapy programs, for example, where you would need a volunteer to help with some of the programs, yes, that were going on, but if they were trying to take them out into the community, then I could start there looking for volunteers, and through my community contacts, through schools and churches and organizations in the community, especially because it was Riverview was right in the middle of three communities, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody, so that how I could pull from that Tri-Cities area, if you like, and educate people. So I would ask people would say, what was I doing now? And I would tell them, or I would just say to them, I'm working at Valleyview Hospital now, and my director of rehabilitation would like to look at the whole person. And so I would be invited into all different churches and talk to their women's groups or talk to their congregations, talk to anybody who would listen to me. And I would have some stories to go around along with it. And I remember one of the first stories was there was a man being released the first week I was there. He was going out into the community, and they had actually found him a placement in his old home where he had come from. And they weren't quite sure how he was going to fit in. But as we were saying goodbye, and no one had come to see him, so he was put into a taxi. He was put into a taxi with his belongings in plastic bags. So I marched up to Moyra's office right away and said, you know what? Aren't there suitcases? No, we don't have, we don't, that's not part of where we're at. So I said, well, is that part of could that be part of the volunteer program? Could we raise some money for that? Could we, we put on a strawberry tea. What can we do? Strawberry tea had been an invention there for a long time. And I said, that kind of money could be used towards that. And I went out into the community, and I think I went to every secondhand store, talked to the woman that was the head of the volunteer society there at the hospital at the time, and told her the story. And by the next week, we had 7 suitcases. So if anybody else was going to move, there was going to be the dignity of having their belongings in a suitcase. So it was little things like that. And so many of those little things that would come up. And if I would mention it to Moyra, or if she would see something as to how we could get out into the community then to work with them and talk to them, I would go to the colleges and ask if I could talk if they needed volunteer hours, or to the schools if they needed volunteer hours. But when I went into the high schools, then I got some flack from the administration at the hospital, because at that time they didn't have any volunteers under 19 years old. They didn't think that was appropriate. And I said, well, do you have a volunteer training program? Well, no, they didn't, and particularly they certainly hadn't brought in younger volunteers. They had volunteer orientation, but it wasn't an understanding of why these people were different. Why mental illness, and particularly organic brain syndrome, as we talked about it. And so I started a program for volunteers that was just strictly for teenagers. And they were a delight, and they were very reliable for a 7, 8, 9 month stretch. Well, when the powers that be, when Moyra would put her reports in, would say, that they're not long-standing volunteers, etc. And she would just back me up of the importance. Well, remember when the tea was put on. Remember when we took them to a garden, or when we started the gardening program. That was another thing. Moyra wanted plants around everyone. And she wanted little groups instead of chairs being all along the edge of the walls. She wanted that different. She wanted to make it so. Well, my grandchildren are arriving. Okay, we're just going to have to stop for a moment.
Yes, and can you just
come in?
I will just. Hi, I'm a historian, and I'm filming your grandma.
We didn't know this.
On camera. Cool. I've got her
And
mic out.
this is my.
Awesome.
This is my daughter and my granddaughter and my grandson.
Hi. 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 Your grandma's famous now. Yeah. Hollywood.
Hi, Maddie.
Hi, guys.
Do you know what? And hi, JJ.
Hi.
We will.
I think we'll be about another half hour.
We'll be about another half hour,
Okay.
and
Grandpa
Grandpa needs some help. So if you wouldn't mind giving Grandpa some help, that would be really appreciated.
Okay.
We'll go downstairs and hang out.
Yeah, there's some Coke or some juice in the fridge, or ice cold water if you're thirsty.
Oh, it's good. My mom bought us a pop.
Oh, did she? Oh, well, that's good then.
Thank you.
Hey, go downstairs.
Can I be happy with you?
That was a really nice segment.
After I help Grandpa.
That was a really nice segment. Oh, so your daughter's just probably
She's going to
going
go and park the
Okay.
car. Now, she was one of my junior volunteers, and because I had these 4 teenage volunteers in my own home.
Okay, well, I think that perhaps, perhaps since we're on that topic, if you could speak to how you came to involve people, young people from Katimavik.
Well, it was the same thing. After we discovered that having volunteers come in from the community and our children, who very much wanted to understand more because Mother was always talking about it and it was now Mother's job, and very concerned for people that weren't like them. And the schools at that time were starting to integrate people with Down syndrome, and they were starting to be integrated into their classrooms. And so I just encouraged them to learn, and I encouraged them to take the volunteer classes that I was offering and any other volunteer classes that were being involved. Then they could use those hours towards their schooling. And then it was Moyra who came up with the idea of Katimavik. And she said, why don't we apply for Katimavik volunteers? Well, the powers that be again thought, well, just 3 months, and we said if we took a good couple of weeks for education, have them involved, and I would spend a lot of time with them, and that's how they became involved, and they were fabulous. I kept in touch with some of them, and I still keep in touch with one girl. We just got along.
That's okay, I will just sort of thinking about Kathy, but I think I'm going to get you first, and then maybe see if Kathy's willing to talk.
Oh,
with
she
me.
would be.
So just tell me. So you have this contact with the Katimavik kids,
and their supervisors that came. So I had to go and talk to them. They were given an opportunity. We were given so many volunteers. As you know, the Katimavik program, you got maybe 9 or 12 volunteers in your community, and then they were assigned different things. Well, one of the assignments was to become interested in mental health and to become a volunteer at Valleyview Hospital. And I had to have a list of kinds of things that they would do, the kind of training that they would have, like even to the basics of how you take a person on a wheelchair properly, how you, particularly with older people and particularly with people with mental challenges, how you would approach them, how you would make sure that you have eye contact, how you would get to their level when you're talking to them. You bring a chair over. If they come in and they offer you a hand, if you do it in a gentle way, you shake their hand. That's legitimate touch. And some of those people are never really touched other than being looked after. And there's a difference. And that had to be genuine, and the people would know the difference. And some of the staff, the nursing staff and the social work staff, were very concerned not only with the teenage volunteers, but with all volunteers, because we went from something like 200, around 200 volunteer hours a month when I first started there, that there were some months we got up to over 1,500 hours a month. And that was a lot to coordinate. But I loved my job, and as I went on to it, I didn't have, again, the credentials to be there. I didn't have a nursing background, and my background was education, and I wasn't a coordinator of volunteers, professional coordinator of volunteers. So during that time, Moyra encouraged me, and my husband said, fine, go for it. I went back to Langara College for the year and took night classes and got a certificate for a professional volunteer coordinator. And I became then a part of the Western Canadian Professional Volunteer Coordinators, and found out what they were doing in other places, and found out that mental hospitals didn't particularly have volunteer programs or even have a volunteer coordinator, because what they were doing at that time was using a nurse in some of the places to take that on as a part of her wing, sort of, if there were going to be volunteers up. So in doing that, then I had a few more tools, but I had taken quite a few courses in the communities sector. But there were some interesting things that you really had to learn as a volunteer coordinator as well, that in some cases people came and thought they were going to change the world by being a volunteer there. And with good interview skills, you could find out what they were good at. And you could let them try what they wanted to do. But if you didn't think they were suitable for it, or if you didn't think that they would be good going in a locked ward, I had alternatives in my back pocket that said we would really like them to volunteer at Valleyview, but perhaps one of these would be of your interest, and they wouldn't even known that that area was there, because we wound up having a second-hand store. So I would get donations of some clothing from some of the churches and from some of their thrift shops, and we were given a small room because of course they were downsizing, so there were extra rooms, and I would be given one, and I had some volunteers come in and they made it like a thrift shop. And that was one of the programs where they were getting ready to go back out into the community. The OTs would take them out to shop and to see if they could handle shopping, to see if they could handle being in a place. We even had the clothes on, it looked like a shop. The clothes would be all hung up and nice displays, and it was open certain hours. And we made a list of all the volunteer programs that we would have available for them, for the patients, and then they would put it into their nursing plan or their occupational therapy plan, that how they could react and be part of the community again. And so we came up with some wonderful creative ideas. And Moyra was just behind them 100%, or brought them up herself, and then said, okay, how are we going to make it happen?
Okay. So I want to just, there's a question I want to ask you is, could you describe what the facilities were like at Valleyview? Like what was the space that you worked in like? And
there was one of the large buildings that was right across from the main hospital. And if you're aware of Valleyview, there was the administration building, and then they had a ward 6 and 8 and 5 that were still operational when I was there. And what used to be the ward 3, the building 3, which was just across the corner from the administration building, before you went up to the theater area, to the auditorium area. It was one of the older buildings.
so was this Valleyview?
This was Valleyview.
And Valleyview was kind of separate from Riverview.
It was separate from Riverview.
Yes, okay. So there were these cottages or separate?
No, they were actually old patient buildings.
Okay.
But they had been closed down. They were the older ones. And the volunteer center had a floor in, and they put volunteers walk-in level, so that we
Yes.
were in the basement level, and so that half of that became the volunteer center. The other half of that was pastoral care, and volunteer and pastoral care worked very closely. And then upstairs in one of the main rooms, we were allowed to use as our thrift shop, so that when they came up the front stairs, when they brought the patients up, or the nurse would be bringing them up, or their family would bring them up, that they could go, it was like going into a store, so that they had the experience. Now, we had to fight for that. We had to make it happen, but that space was available, so we did make it happen. And then going on to how we worked with pastoral care, Moyra was passionate that there was a life and a soul in each and every person, and that they were there. You were never to talk over, talk through, talk around. They were people. So if you were doing care or you were working...
Technology, not my friend. So, Joyce, so Moyra believed in
the whole approach. And at that time, we were going through the great standardization and accreditation process. And in order to be accredited, you had to, not just on paper, or at least Moyra believed not just on paper, that you looked at the whole person, that you stood for mind, body, and spirit. And that all three of those had to be looked after. So that there was a regular hospital there, so that if someone did have some minor hospital things that needed to be taken care of, or they needed the full-time bed care, that type of thing. Ward 6, 8, and 5 were ambulatory people. And then there was the hospital wing that had their patients in. But she just firmly believed that they should have their spiritual life. It was very important to her. So pastoral care was very important, not from a religious point,